30 years of marriage shatters in a single announcement, leaving two adult siblings caught in the fallout. One sides with their mother, convinced she sacrificed everything and received nothing. The other defends their father, certain he endured years of quiet criticism. Old memories twist into weapons, childhood bonds erode, and every family gathering becomes a battlefield. When silence finally explodes into open conflict, the siblings must confront a painful truth. The divorce belongs to them too. Amid fractured loyalties and dismantled history, they face a choice: remain divided by the past or find fragile release in shared loss. Let's begin the story. The air at the dining table tightened before anyone tasted the food. Forks rested against porcelain plates like weapons waiting for a signal. The family had gathered for a Sunday meal, a ritual that had survived holidays, illnesses, relocations, and the exhaustion of routine. Yet beneath the rhythm of habit, tension pulsed. The parents sat across from each other, bodies rigid, postures balanced between defiance and distance. 30 years of marriage pressed down on the table like invisible weight. Their children, grown, employed, independent, felt the tremor before the announcement came. Each child read the warning signs differently. The way their mother's eyes lingered on untouched food, the way their father's shoulders squared as if bracing for recoil. When the words arrived, they cut through the room with surgical precision. The parents declared the marriage finished. No trial separation. No hopeful counseling. No promise of reconciliation. Just an ending, blunt and irreversible. The children felt the crack ripple outward. 30 years collapsed in a single statement. The home that shaped their identities fractured into two futures. Their adult status offered no shield. Childhood memories bled into present grief. Loyalty became a question before anyone breathed again. The eldest child stiffened with silent judgment, recalling every sacrifice the mother had endured, every compromise swallowed without recognition. In that memory, blame tilted toward the father. The second child clenched fists under the table, heart pounding with anger at the mother's coldness, the endless criticisms, the way she sharpened silence into punishment. Blame swung in the opposite direction. The parents sat steady in their decision. No shouting, no tears, no visible regret. Their calmness unsettled the children more than rage would have. The fracture already existed, only now it surfaced in daylight. Food cooled on plates, uneaten. The air pressed heavier with each passing minute. The children felt the gravity of sides forming without consent. Their bodies carried old allegiances, unspoken but deeply rooted. Memories of who comforted them, who disciplined them, who showed up, who disappeared, pulled them into opposite corners of the same fractured family. The mother rose first, moving with deliberate slowness. She gathered her plate, though no food left it. She carried it to the sink as though performing ritual rather than routine. The father followed her movements with detached stillness. He lifted his glass but did not drink. The children remained seated, pinned by an invisible divide. The room no longer belonged to them as a unit. It belonged to fragments, each fighting for recognition. 30 years of marriage ended in silence, but the silence roared louder than any argument. The moment hardened into memory. Each child etched it differently: betrayal, relief, shock, or inevitability. None of them knew yet how deep the fracture would run. None of them understood that choosing sides would become unavoidable, that loyalty would demand sacrifice, that the divorce would not belong only to the parents. The evening ended without ceremony. Chairs pushed back, dishes left half-washed, footsteps separated down the hallway. The house, once filled with noise and interruptions, vibrated with emptiness. The shatter had occurred. Nothing would restore the table to its former state. The days after the announcement stretched thin. The family moved through routines as if the air carried static that refused to discharge. Each person tried to resume normal rhythms, yet normal no longer existed. The fracture grew visible in gestures, in the way each child lingered in certain rooms, in the way their parents' names tasted differently when spoken aloud. The eldest child returned often to the mother's side. Memories of long nights, filled with her persistence, her quiet strength, and her overlooked sacrifices pressed forward. The child imagined her years of patience, her deferred dreams, her careful control of a household where tempers sometimes flared. Sympathy flowed naturally, as if loyalty had been rehearsed long before the divorce announcement. The father's distance during those years replayed in the mind like a film that refused to stop. Responsibility seemed clear. The second child pulled toward the father. Resentment toward the mother swelled without warning. Old wounds resurfaced, moments when her sharpness pierced confidence, when her disapproval hardened into silence that lasted for days. The father's consistency appeared brighter now. His quiet presence reframed as stability rather than absence. Every detail aligned to create an image of unfairness endured by him. The divorce, then, became evidence of her failure. These alignments happened silently, without spoken declarations. Yet actions betrayed them. The eldest child called the mother daily, filled her weekends with companionship, reminded her she was valued. The second child shadowed the father, assisting with errands, sharing meals, treating him as though he had been abandoned. The parents, whether consciously or not, leaned into these roles. The mother absorbed the eldest's support with relief she rarely admitted. She began to share frustrations once locked away. She spoke of sacrifices that no one noticed, of years when she carried the weight alone, of disappointment that had eroded affection. Her tone never rose, but her bitterness settled heavy. The father, in turn, gravitated toward the second child's protection. He offered measured explanations, not excuses. He spoke of a house that never felt peaceful, of criticisms that hollowed his resolve, of dreams that withered under constant scrutiny. He framed himself as steady, misunderstood, weary of constant battles. The children absorbed these narratives as truth. Each story reinforced the side they had chosen, deepening the divide not only between parents but between siblings. What once connected them, shared childhood, inside jokes, the comfort of belonging, now carried sharp edges. Their conversations thinned into courtesy, stripped of the warmth that once defined them. Family gatherings became tense negotiations. A holiday approached, and questions of attendance carried new weight. Would they sit at the same table? Would they split into two houses, two traditions, two stories about the same day? The fracture widened as logistics became symbols. Every choice carried implication, every absence carried accusation. The eldest child scrolled through old photos, searching for evidence of unity, but even in captured smiles, cracks became visible. The second child avoided those photos, preferring the present where loyalty felt justified. Both believed they saw truth clearly, though their truths pointed in opposite directions. The fault lines deepened without eruption. Earthquakes rarely announce themselves with violence at first. They whisper through shifts underground, through small tremors that weaken the foundation. The family lived in those tremors, pretending stability while everything beneath them strained. By the end of the month, the fracture had become a map no one could ignore. Sides had been chosen. Neutrality no longer felt possible. The fracture pulled memory into sharper focus. Each child, aligned to a parent, began to re-examine the past through new filters. Moments that once appeared ordinary now glowed with meaning, reshaped by the loyalty they carried. The past became a courtroom, and every remembered scene turned into evidence. The eldest child replayed scenes of childhood evenings. The mother stood in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour, moving with precision as she stretched meals across tight budgets. She balanced schedules, managed crises, held everything steady when the father worked late or disappeared into silence. Those images grew heavier now, transformed into proof that she had borne the burden alone. Resentment toward the father thickened with every recollection. The second child, meanwhile, sifted through a different archive. The father appeared seated at the edge of beds, reading softly, presence solid, even when words faltered. He repaired bicycles in the garage with patient hands, never asking for praise. His quietness once felt like background noise. Now it became evidence of uncelebrated devotion. The mother's stern corrections, her clipped remarks, her cold retreats after arguments replayed with sharper detail. Blame attached itself to her like shadow. Neither child remembered neutrally anymore. Memory bent under the pressure of allegiance. The parents, in their separate spaces, encouraged the bending, sometimes deliberately, sometimes through the relief of finally being heard. They spoke truths that felt overdue, truths polished by years of private resentment. Each child absorbed those truths as confirmation, weaving them into personal narratives of loyalty. The house itself seemed to join the testimony. Old objects whispered of division. A stack of bills once managed by the mother felt like evidence of imbalance. Tools left rusting in the garage suggested neglect. A family portrait, framed and dusty, looked staged, every smile now interpreted as performance. Even the walls seemed to testify, one child hearing echoes of arguments muffled by closed doors, the other recalling the silence after those arguments as the deeper wound. When they gathered together, the past surfaced in unspoken tension. One child remembered a holiday ruined by their father's absence, while the other remembered the mother's icy anger that followed. Neither could acknowledge both truths at once. Each carried their version as weapon, ready though never spoken aloud. Resentment spilled into subtler actions. The eldest child adjusted conversations, steering topics toward the mother's sacrifices, reminding others of her resilience. The second child countered with reminders of the father's steadiness, his overlooked patience. Every statement carried weight beyond the words, as though the past required constant defense. The parents, separated yet aware, leaned harder into these divisions. The mother spoke longer, releasing memories once buried, her tone steady but sharpened by years of containment. The father listened more, offering details of neglect he once endured, his voice steady but edged with hurt. Each child became a custodian of grievances, carrying them forward with renewed conviction. Time did not soften the resurfacing, it accelerated it. What once felt like buried history now demanded constant excavation. The family lived in two timelines at once, the present fracture and the reinterpreted past that justified it. The siblings began to avoid one another outside necessary encounters. Conversations that once stretched freely now shortened into clipped exchanges. They no longer trusted each other's recollections. Memory had become partisan, impossible to share without conflict. By the end of the season, the past no longer rested quietly. It prowled through every interaction, a restless presence that refused to stay buried. The divorce had not only split the present, it had reopened the archive of their entire family history, reshaping every page. And the more they looked backward, the more inevitable the future conflict became. The fracture no longer hid beneath courtesy. By winter, the divide shaped daily life, forcing choices that revealed allegiance without need for declaration. The family became two households, two orbits that pulled their children in opposite directions. The eldest child settled into the mother's rhythm. Afternoons stretched into errands together, groceries carried in silence heavy with unspoken gratitude. The mother leaned on that presence with subtle insistence. She shared thoughts once sealed away, criticisms sharpened by freedom. She described years of feeling dismissed, her efforts invisible, her sacrifices forgotten. The eldest child listened with steady nods, storing her words as proof. The role of defender no longer felt optional, it became a duty. The second child built routine around the father. Weekends turned into shared tasks, repairing fences, reorganizing tools, walking through hardware stores with quiet ease. The father accepted this loyalty with calm appreciation, offering fragments of his side in return. He spoke of long endurance, of silence as survival, of affection drained by constant criticism. The second child absorbed his weariness as validation, carrying it forward with protective intensity. Each parent, knowingly or not, reinforced the division. Each child stepped into positions once hidden in shadow. The eldest became the mother's witness, the second became the father's advocate. Neutral ground evaporated. Even mundane decisions, whose house to visit, whose message to return first, became declarations of loyalty. The siblings began to orbit away from each other. Conversations shrank into politeness, stripped of warmth. Childhood bonds frayed under the strain of opposing narratives. Shared memories no longer united them. They served as battlegrounds. The eldest recalled nights when the father vanished into work, while the second remembered mornings when the mother's silence suffocated the house. Both memories carried truth, yet truth no longer bridged the divide. Holidays collapsed under the pressure of allegiance. The family, once bound by ritual, fractured into alternating schedules. Thanksgiving no longer meant one table, but two. The eldest carved turkey at the mother's side, arranging plates in the same careful order she once maintained for the entire family. The second toasted the father across a smaller table, filling silence with easy laughter. Each celebration contained an undercurrent of absence, a hollow space where unity once lived. Friends and extended relatives noticed the shift, but treated it as inevitable. They divided invitations, balanced conversations, learned quickly which child carried which version of the story. Whispers of blame threaded through the larger circle, echoing the sides already chosen within the family. The siblings no longer spoke of the divorce directly. They did not argue openly. The silence between them carried sharper edges than words could have. Every interaction trembled with the weight of what remained unsaid. They looked at one another and saw not just a sibling, but an opponent, someone carrying the voice of the parent they had rejected. The parents, meanwhile, found relief in their chosen allies. They no longer needed to justify themselves in isolation. Their children had become extensions of their narratives, carrying forward the stories they wanted remembered. Dependence deepened in subtle but unmistakable ways. By spring, the division had hardened into permanence. The family no longer functioned as a single entity. They existed in parallel, each side convinced of its version of history, each child tethered to a parent's pain. The taking of sides was complete. And with it came the quiet certainty that reconciliation, between parents, between siblings, slipped further out of reach. The silence between siblings lasted until the first forced gathering. A relative's milestone drew them into the same room, a gathering neither could avoid without suspicion. The event demanded civility, yet civility collapsed the moment they faced one another. The eldest arrived first, carrying the mother's presence in posture and tone. Conversations circled around gratitude for her resilience, quiet remarks about strength and endurance. Each phrase carried the mother's imprint, subtle reminders of sacrifices overlooked. The eldest smiled politely, but behind the smile lay judgment sharpened by months of one-sided memory. The second arrived later, walking in with the father's steadiness. Words landed with measured calm, reinforcing his quiet dignity, his unspoken endurance. Jokes surfaced easily, masking the weight beneath them, but every gesture carried defense of the father's character. The second moved through the crowd as though balancing his honor against invisible accusations. When the siblings finally crossed paths, the air around them thickened. No words of confrontation passed, yet the weight of unspoken accusation radiated. Each carried months of loyalty, rehearsed arguments built from memories, reshaped by allegiance. The encounter needed no spark. The fire had already gathered. The break erupted over something small, a remark about the mother's health, answered by a comment about the father's stability. The words themselves lacked malice, yet beneath them rested entire histories. Tone sharpened, pauses lengthened, voices dropped in volume but rose in tension. The crowd noticed, subtle glances exchanged, yet no one intervened. The eldest spoke of burdens carried, of sacrifices ignored, of a woman who gave everything and received nothing. The second countered with endurance, with quiet dedication, with a man who stayed despite constant criticism. Each statement clashed not only against the other, but against years of reinterpreted memory. The siblings no longer argued about parents, they argued about identity. To defend one parent meant to defend the version of childhood each had chosen to believe. Neither could retreat without dismantling the foundation built since the divorce. The argument escalated, voices rising, eyes narrowing, until the event itself bent around their conflict. Guests withdrew into corners, the celebration muted by the storm unfolding at its center. The parents were absent, yet their presence loomed in every word. The mother's grievances echoed in the eldest's anger. The father's quiet suffering resounded in the second's defense. The siblings became mouthpieces for wounds that were never theirs to carry, yet they carried them with conviction deeper than their own. The confrontation ended not with resolution, but with separation. One sibling stormed out, the other remained rigid and unyielding. The crowd exhaled in relief, though the fracture within the family grew sharper, more visible than ever before. In the days that followed, silence returned, but carried new edges. The siblings avoided each other completely. Communication dwindled to logistical necessity, stripped of affection. Their parents, when told of the conflict, absorbed the news with quiet satisfaction. Each found comfort in the child's defense, even as the divide between siblings deepened. The breaking point revealed what had been true all along. The divorce did not belong only to the parents. It belonged to the children too, reshaping their loyalties, their identities, their bond with one another. What shattered 30 years of marriage now fractured the next generation. And beneath the wreckage, a question remained unanswered. How long could they live in opposition before the damage became permanent? The fracture lingered after the confrontation, raw and unhealed. Weeks stretched into silence. The siblings avoided calls, ignored messages, and carved separate paths around family responsibilities. The absence of contact offered temporary relief, yet it also deepened the emptiness once filled with unspoken understanding. Childhood bonds, once effortless, now felt irretrievable. The parents remained steady in their division, yet even they sensed fatigue in their children. The mother leaned heavily on the eldest, repeating grievances until they lost their edge. The father leaned on the second, retelling quiet justifications until they sounded rehearsed. The children carried those words, but the weight pressed harder with time. What once felt like loyalty began to resemble chains. A turning point arrived not through intention, but necessity. The family faced an unavoidable responsibility: the sale of the house. 30 years of marriage lived within its walls, and 30 years now required dismantling. Both siblings arrived on the same day, summoned by obligation. The house greeted them with silence, its rooms echoing with absence. Dust-coated shelves where photographs once stood. The walls carried faint outlines of furniture removed. The kitchen, once filled with arguments and laughter, stood hollow. The living room, once a stage for birthdays and holidays, felt smaller without voices. The siblings moved through separate tasks, avoiding each other's gaze. Boxes filled with objects carried the weight of memory: a cracked vase, a worn armchair, school trophies dulled by years of neglect. Each item demanded decision: keep, discard, divide. The process forced them into parallel action, yet the silence between them pulsed with history. At first, the division followed familiar lines. The eldest protected items tied to the mother's persistence: recipe books, sewing kits, framed photos of her family. The second defended objects tied to the father's steadiness: tools, records, souvenirs from trips he arranged. Each guarded possessions, as though guarding truth. But as the day wore on, exhaustion softened the edges. They sat surrounded by boxes, faces lined with dust and weariness. The house pressed on them, its weight undeniable. For the first time since the divorce, they felt the enormity of what they were dismantling. Memories surfaced without defense. Both recalled the same moments: the laughter of snow days, the nervous excitement before vacations, the quiet comfort of evenings when everyone gathered in the same room. Those memories did not belong to one parent or the other. They belonged to both. And more than that, they belonged to the siblings together. The realization settled slowly, without words. They looked at one another, and for a fleeting moment, saw not opponents but companions in loss. They recognized that loyalty had twisted them into carriers of wounds not their own. They recognized that their bond, though damaged, still pulsed beneath the fracture. The release came not as reconciliation with the past, but as acceptance of its complexity. Their parents' marriage had broken, but not every memory could be divided into sides. Some moments lived outside blame, and those moments mattered too. When they left the house, boxes loaded into separate cars, the silence between them felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but no longer sharp enough to wound. They parted with nods rather than avoidance, with the faint recognition that their connection remained possible. The divorce had shattered the family, yet from the fragments remained a fragile truth. Conflict could not erase the bond of shared history. Release did not come from choosing sides, but from acknowledging the weight of what they had lost together. And though the future carried no promises, it carried a possibility. That was enough. Thanks for listening. Hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe.